The doors of the docking bay opened with a loud hiss. Jake Morrison stood near the loading platform, watching as the alien ship connected to the station. He had been a cargo ship captain for 5 years now, moving goods and sometimes passengers across the galaxy. Today was different. Today he would meet the Vrelnathi for the first time. Jake was 32 years old, tall with brown hair and tired eyes. He wore his usual work clothes, a simple gray uniform with his captain's badge on the chest. Next to him stood Danny Rodriguez, his co-pilot and best friend. Danny was shorter, always joking, always trying to make the serious moments less heavy. "They look scary in the pictures," Danny said, checking his datapad. "Like big cats that learn to walk on 2 legs?" Jake nodded. The briefing files showed images of the Vrelnathi. They were huge, covered in fur with sharp teeth and claws. Their faces looked like lions, but their eyes held intelligence that was clearly not animal. They stood upright, wore clothes, and spoke several languages. But they were also warriors. Their whole culture was built around being strong and tough. "Just be respectful," Jake said. "We need this job. The pay is good, and they asked for us specifically." The docking tunnel finished connecting. Green lights flashed along the walls, showing that the air was safe to breathe. Jake took a deep breath and walked forward. Danny followed close behind. The first Vrelnathi to step through was massive. He stood at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. His fur was a deep red-brown color, and a thick mane covered his head and neck. Beads and small metal rings were tied into the mane, clicking together when he moved. His eyes were golden yellow, bright and sharp. He wore dark armor that looked both ceremonial and practical. "I am Ambassador Krelvax," the alien said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a barrel. The translator device on his belt turned his words into English. "You are Captain Morrison." It was not a question. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Welcome to Trading Post Epsilon. We're honored to transport you and your group." Krelvax stared at Jake for a long moment. His face did not show much emotion, but Jake felt like he was being measured somehow. Finally, the ambassador gave a small nod. "Your ship has good ratings. You fly safe routes and keep your promises. These things matter." 3 more Vrelnathi stepped through behind the ambassador. They were warriors, Jake could tell. They moved like fighters, always aware of their surroundings. Their eyes checked every corner, every person, every possible danger. They carried weapons on their belts. Though station rules said they had to stay powered off, 2 more Vrelnathi followed, dressed in lighter clothing. Diplomats, probably. They carried datapads and spoke quietly to each other in their own language. Then came the last member of the group. He was small, much smaller than the others. His fur was lighter in color, with spots that had not yet faded completely. His mane was just starting to grow in. He carried a tall staff, almost as tall as himself, and he struggled to keep it steady as he walked. His legs were shorter, his movements less sure. A child. They had brought a child. "This is my son, Pip Krell," Ambassador Krelvax said. He placed one large paw on the young one's shoulder. "He will observe and learn. He is the future of our line." Pip Krell looked up at Jake with wide golden eyes. The young Vrelnathi's ears were pointed forward, showing curiosity. His tail, thin and still growing, swished back and forth despite his obvious attempts to keep it still. "Hello, Pip Krell," Jake said, keeping his voice friendly. "Welcome aboard." The cub opened his mouth as if to speak, then looked up at his father. Krelvax's expression did not change, but something in his posture made Pip Krell close his mouth again. The young one simply nodded instead, trying to copy the formal gesture his father had made earlier. Jake felt something twist in his chest. The cub looked nervous. But this was not his culture, not his business. Different species raised their children in different ways. "Let me show you to your quarters," Jake said. "Then we can tour the ship before we leave." The group moved through the station corridors. People stopped to stare. The Vrelnathi were new to this part of space. Most humans had only seen pictures. Seeing them in person was different. They were bigger, more powerful, more real than any image could show. Pip Krell walked beside his father. But Jake noticed how the cub's head turned to look at everything. The lights, the windows showing space outside, the other aliens walking past. His eyes were full of wonder. Even as he tried to maintain a serious expression like the adults around him, they reached Jake's ship, the Horizon Runner. It was not a large vessel, but it was well maintained and fast. Jake had built a good reputation by being reliable and careful. The cargo hold could be converted for passengers, and he had done just that for this trip. The tour took almost an hour. Ambassador Krelvax asked many questions about the ship's systems. He wanted to know about the engines, the shields, the life support. He asked about backup systems and emergency procedures. The warriors checked the security features and the exits. Through it all, Pip Krell followed quietly. The staff in his hands never wavered now, as if he had found his strength. But Jake saw how the cub's arms trembled slightly from holding it so long. "Your ship is acceptable," Krelvax finally said. "We will prepare for departure." Jake showed them to their quarters. The Vrelnathi had requested rooms next to each other, with the largest space going to the ambassador and his son. The warriors took smaller rooms, and the diplomats would share a common area. As the group settled in, Jake returned to the bridge. Danny was already there, running pre-flight checks. "They seem intense," Danny said. "That's one word for it," Jake replied. He sat in his captain's chair and pulled up the navigation charts. Their destination was 3 days away at standard speed. 3 days with the Vrelnathi aboard his ship. "The kid looks scared," Danny added quietly. Jake had thought the same thing, but he said nothing. He focused on the departure procedures instead. The station cleared them for launch at 2200 hours. That gave him 6 hours to make sure everything was perfect. Lisa Hayes, his engineer, called up from the engine room. "All systems green, Captain." "Ready when you are." "Good work, Lisa." Pete Carson, who handled communications and cargo, confirmed that all the supplies were loaded and secured. The Horizon Runner was ready to fly. As the hours passed, Jake found himself thinking about young Pip Krell. The cub could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old if Vrelnathi aged anything like humans. Why bring a child on a diplomatic mission? The briefing files mentioned that Vrelnathi raised their young in groups called prides, and that they started training early. But how early? At 2200 hours exactly, Jake initiated the departure sequence. The Horizon Runner detached from the station and moved away on maneuvering thrusters. Once they were clear, Jake engaged the main engines. The ship accelerated smoothly, and then the stars stretched into lines as they jumped to faster-than-light speed. They were on their way. Jake left Danny on the bridge and went to check on their passengers. He found Ambassador Krelvax in the observation lounge, looking out at the streaking stars. Pip Krell sat nearby, still holding his staff, his young face serious as he watched the view. "Is everything comfortable?" Jake asked. "Yes," Krelvax said. "Your ship flies well." Jake nodded and turned to leave, but Pip Krell's voice stopped him. "Captain?" The word was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. "Yes?" The cub hesitated, looking at his father. Krelvax's expression darkened slightly, and Pip Krell quickly looked down. "Nothing." "Thank you." Jake left them there, but the brief exchange stayed in his mind. Something was happening with this family, something he did not fully understand, and for reasons he could not explain, it bothered him. Pip Krell slept through the rest of that day and most of the night. Lisa monitored him closely, making sure his body recovered properly. When the young cub finally woke, it was early morning ship time. Jake was just starting his day when Lisa called him to the medical bay. "He is asking for you," she said over the comm. Jake arrived to find Pip Krell sitting up on the bed, looking much better than yesterday. His eyes were bright again, his fur clean where Lisa had gently wiped away the dried sweat. The fluid drip was gone, and he was holding a cup of water in both paws. "Captain," the cub said when Jake entered. His voice was stronger now. "Hey there, how are you feeling?" "Better, much better." Pip Krell set down the cup. "Lisa says I can leave soon." "That is good news." Jake sat in a chair near the bed. "You had us worried yesterday." Pip Krell looked down at his paws. "I am sorry, I was weak." "No," Jake said firmly, "you were not weak. You pushed yourself beyond what your body could handle. That is not weakness. That is just being young and still growing. The cub looked up, confusion in his golden eyes. Father always says rest is for the weak. Your father is learning that maybe he was wrong about that. Pipkrell's ears perked up with surprise. Father can be wrong? Jake smiled. Everyone can be wrong sometimes, even alphas, even ambassadors. The important thing is being willing to change when you learn better. The door opened and Ambassador Krelvax entered, followed by the three warriors. But something was different about the group. Their posture was less aggressive. The warriors did not look like they were ready for battle. They looked almost uncertain. "My son," Krelvax said, approaching the bed. "You are well?" "Yes, father." The ambassador placed his large paw on Pipkrell's head, a gesture of affection that Jake had not seen before. "I am glad." "I was concerned." Pipkrell's eyes went wide. "You were concerned?" "Of course." "You are my son, my cub?" "I will always be concerned for your welfare." Krelvax glanced at Jake. "The captain has taught me that showing such concern is not weakness. It is another form of strength." Crenther stepped forward. The large warrior looked uncomfortable. "Young Pipkrell, we pushed you too hard. We followed the old ways without thinking if they were right for now. We were wrong." The cub stared at the warrior in shock. Jake understood why. This was probably the first time any adult Vrelnathi had ever admitted a mistake to him. "We will adjust the training," another warrior added. "You will still work hard. You will still grow strong, but we will include rest periods. Recovery time. Balance." Pipkrell looked at his father, as if checking if this was real or some kind of test. Krelvax nodded. "It is true, my son. We have learned from the humans. They too train their young to be strong, but they understand that strength takes time to build. We will honor their wisdom." The cub's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them away, clearly taught that crying was wrong. But a few drops escaped anyway, running down his furred cheeks. "It is acceptable," Krelvax said gently. "Your body has been through much. Tears are not weakness. They are just water." Pipkrell made a small sound and then, surprising everyone, he reached out toward Jake. The gesture was clear. He wanted to be held again. Jake looked at the ambassador, checking for permission. Krelvax gave a slight nod. Jake stood and carefully lifted the young cub. Pipkrell immediately pressed against his chest, just like yesterday. But this time there was no fear, no exhaustion, just comfort. The cub's small arms wrapped around Jake's neck in what could only be called a hug. "Thank you," Pipkrell whispered. "Thank you for being kind." Jake's throat tightened. He rubbed the cub's back gently. "You're welcome, little one." After a moment, Pipkrell pulled back and returned to his father's side. Krelvax placed a paw on his son's shoulder, the touch protective and warm. "We have much to discuss as a pride," the ambassador said to his warriors. "Training methods, cultural adaptations, how we move forward. But first, I believe we owe Captain Morrison our gratitude." Crenther stepped forward. He raised his right paw to his chest in what looked like a salute. "You acted with honor, Captain. You protected a cub who needed protection. You challenged us when we needed challenging." "You have my respect," the other warriors repeated the gesture. Even Ambassador Krelvax raised his paw in the same salute. "You honor us?" Jake said, not sure what else to say. "No," Krelvax replied. "You honored us by treating my son with care when we had forgotten to do so." The Vrelnathi left the medical bay together, Pipkrell walking between his father and Crenther. The cub looked back once at Jake and gave a small wave with his paw. Jake waved back. Lisa came over, shaking her head with a smile. That was something else. "I have never seen aliens change their minds so completely." "They were not being cruel," Jake said. "They were just following tradition without questioning if it still made sense. Once they saw another way, they were willing to change. Still, not many people would have done what you did." Jake shrugged. "I just did what felt right." The next 2 days passed peacefully. The Vrelnathi continued their training, but it was different now. Jake checked the cargo bay monitors occasionally and saw a new approach. Pipkrell would run laps, but only 10 at a time with rest breaks in between. He would climb and jump. But the warriors watched carefully for signs of real exhaustion. When the cub needed water or food, they provided it without complaint. More surprisingly, Jake saw moments of play. The warriors would chase Pipkrell in what looked like a game, all of them laughing. The cub would pounce on his father's tail, and Krelvax would pretend to be caught. These small moments of joy mixed with the serious training, creating something that looked healthier. On their last evening before reaching the destination, Ambassador Krelvax invited Jake's entire crew to share a meal. It was a formal dinner. By Vrelnathi standards, with specific foods from their homeworld and ceremonies that honored different qualities. They honored strength as expected. They honored courage and discipline, but then Krelvax added something new. We also honor the strength of the open heart, he said, speaking both in his language and in English. The courage to show care. The discipline to know when to push and when to protect. These two are qualities of a true warrior. The ceremony concluded with gift-giving. Pipkrell approached Jake shyly, holding something small in his paws. It was a carved token, made of polished stone on a leather cord. "This is for you," the cub said. "It is from my pride to yours. It means you are pack friend." Jake accepted the gift, genuinely moved. "Thank you, Pipkrell. I will treasure this." "You saved me," the cub said quietly. "Not just from being tired. You saved me from breaking. I will remember always." Jake crouched down to the cub's level. "You are going to grow up to be an amazing leader. Because you have your father's strength, but you also have a kind heart. Never lose that." Pipkrell nodded seriously. Then he did something unexpected. He pressed his small forehead against Jake's, copying the gesture his father had made days before. It was a Vrelnathi sign of deep respect and affection, Ambassador. Krelvax came over and placed his large paw on Jake's shoulder. The gesture was warm, friendly, completely different from their first meeting. "When my people write our histories of contact with humans, this journey will be remembered," the ambassador said. "Not for trade agreements or political arrangements, but for a simple lesson learned. That true strength includes gentleness. That the best leaders know when to push and when to protect. That wisdom can come from unexpected places, even from humans?" Jake asked with a slight smile. "Especially from humans," Krelvax agreed. His expression held warmth. "You have taught me to be a better father. That is a debt I cannot easily repay." "Just take care of him," Jake said, looking at Pipkrell. "That is payment enough." The next morning, they arrived at the destination. Another trading post, larger than the first one, where the Vrelnathi would transfer to a different ship for the next part of their journey. The crew helped them gather their belongings. The warriors were respectful and even friendly, asking questions about Earth and human culture. The diplomats exchanged contact information with Pete, talking about future cooperation. When it was time to leave, they all gathered at the airlock. Formal goodbyes were exchanged, hands and paws were shaken. But the moment that mattered most was when Pipkrell threw his arms around Jake's waist in a tight hug. "Safe travels, little one," Jake said, hugging him back. "I will miss you, Captain Jake. I will miss you too." Ambassador Krelvax extended his paw and Jake shook it firmly. "Until we meet again, Captain Morrison. May your travels be safe and your heart remain open." "The same to you, Ambassador. Take care of your pride." "I will. You have taught me how." The Vrelnathi walked down the boarding ramp toward the trading post. Pipkrell looked back several times, waving each time. Jake waved back until they disappeared into the crowd of travelers. Danny came up beside him. "You made some good friends there." "Yeah," Jake said. "I think I did." Lisa joined them. "So what now?" "Now we take on our next cargo and head to the next destination," Jake said. "Same as always." "Same as always," Danny agreed. But as they walked back into the ship, Jake touched the carved token hanging around his neck. Nothing was quite the same as always anymore. The galaxy felt a little smaller, a little more connected. And Jake knew that somewhere out there, a young Vrelnathi cub waiting to be. The first day passed quietly. The Vrelnathi stayed in their quarters most of the time, coming out only for meals and scheduled calls with the trading post officials. Jake kept his crew busy with regular ship duties, giving their guests space to settle in on the second morning. Things changed. Jake was in the mess hall having coffee when one of the Vrelnathi warriors approached him. The warrior's name was Krenther, and he was the largest of the 3 fighters. His fur was darker than the ambassador's, almost black in some places. "Captain Morrison," Krenther said, "we request use of your cargo bay." Jake set down his cup. "What for?" "Training. We must maintain our physical readiness. The young one must continue his lessons." Jake thought about it. The cargo bay was mostly empty for this trip. They were carrying passengers, not goods. The space was available? "Sure," Jake said. "Just don't damage anything. And let me know if you need the gravity adjusted." Krenther gave a sharp nod and left. An hour later, Jake heard the noise. It came from below, a rhythmic thumping that echoed through the ship's floors. He was on the bridge reviewing their course when Danny looked up from his station. "What is that?" Danny asked. Jake checked the internal sensors. "Cargo bay. The Vrelnathi are training. Sounds intense." It did sound intense. Jake tried to focus on his work, but the thumping continued. Sometimes it was steady, like running footsteps. Other times it was irregular, like something hitting the floor hard. Once in a while he heard voices, sharp and commanding, though the words were unclear through the walls. After 2 hours, his curiosity got the better of him. He told Danny to watch the bridge and made his way down to the cargo bay. The door was open. Inside, the space had been transformed. The Vrelnathi had moved cargo containers to create a path like an obstacle course. Ropes hung from the ceiling beams. Climbing holds had been attached to one wall, simple magnetic grips that would not damage the ship. The 3 warriors stood at different points around the course. In the center, Pipkrell ran. The young cub moved as fast as his legs could carry him. He sprinted across the open floor, jumped to grab a rope, swung to a container, climbed over it, dropped down, rolled, and started running again. His breathing was heavy. His fur was damp with sweat. "Faster!" Krenther barked. A warrior does not tire. A warrior pushes through. Pipkrell pushed harder. His small body worked at full speed, every muscle straining. But Jake could see he was already exhausted. The cub's movements were getting sloppy. His jumps were not as high. His landings were less controlled. "Again," another warrior commanded. "From the start?" "Faster this time." Pipkrell ran back to the beginning of the course and started over. His legs shook, but he did not stop. He did not complain. He just kept going. Jake watched from the doorway. Part of him wanted to say something, to tell them this was too much for a child. But he remembered the briefing files. The Vrelnathi raised their young to be strong. They believed in hard training from an early age. This was their culture. Ambassador Krelvax stood near the wall, observing everything. His face showed no emotion. He watched his son struggle through the course without offering help or encouragement. Just cold observation. Jake quietly left and returned to the bridge. But he could not stop thinking about what he had seen. The image of that small cub, pushing his body past the point of exhaustion, stayed in his mind. "How's it look down there?" Danny asked. "They're serious about their training," Jake said. He did not mention how young Pipkrell looked or how tired. The training continued for 3 more hours. Jake monitored it on the internal cameras, telling himself he was just making sure they did not damage anything. But really, he was watching the cub. Pipkrell never stopped. Even when his legs clearly wanted to give out, even when his breathing became desperate gasps, he kept going. The warriors showed no mercy. They pushed him harder with every lap, every climb, every exercise. Finally, the session ended. Pipkrell collapsed on the floor, his small chest heaving. The warriors stood over him, discussing his performance in their own language. After a moment, they left. Krelvax stayed behind for a few seconds, looking down at his exhausted son. Then he too walked away, leaving Pipkrell alone on the cargo bay floor. Jake watched on the monitor as the young cub slowly pulled himself up. Pipkrell's legs wobbled, but he managed to stand. He picked up his ceremonial staff, which had been set aside during training, and limped toward the door. Lisa's voice came over the com. "Captain, can you come to engineering? I want to show you something about the coolant system." Jake reluctantly left the bridge. Engineering was on the lower deck, near the cargo bay. As he walked through the corridor, he nearly ran into Pipkrell. The cub was walking slowly, leaning slightly on his staff. Up close, Jake could see how truly exhausted he was. His eyes were half closed. His fur was matted with sweat. His whole body trembled with the effort of staying upright. "Hey," Jake said gently. "You okay?" Pipkrell straightened immediately, trying to hide his exhaustion. "Yes, Captain. I am fine," but he was not fine. Jake could see that clearly. The cub was running on pure willpower alone. "That was some intense training," Jake said. "It is necessary. I must be strong." The words sounded rehearsed, like something the cub had been told many times. Even strong people need rest. Pipkrell looked confused by this statement. "Rest is for the weak. Father says so." Jake wanted to argue, but this was not his child, not his culture. He smiled instead. "Well, make sure you drink plenty of water." "Stay hydrated." "Yes, Captain." Pipkrell continued down the corridor. His staff clicking against the floor with each step, Jake watched him go, feeling a knot of concern in his stomach. He went to engineering, discussed the coolant system with Lisa, but his mind was elsewhere. That evening, during the meal period, Jake saw the Vrelnathi in the mess hall. They ate together, sitting at the largest table. Pipkrell sat next to his father, eating slowly. The cub's hands shook slightly as he lifted his food. He was clearly still recovering from the day's training. The conversation at their table was in the Vrelnathi language, but Jake caught glimpses of it through his translator. They were discussing tomorrow's training. It would be even harder, Krenther said. The cub needed to build more endurance. He needed to learn to fight through pain. Pipkrell said nothing. He just nodded when his father looked at him, his expression blank. Jake ate his own meal and tried not to stare. But he kept glancing over, checking on the young one. Each time, Pipkrell was sitting very straight, trying to look strong despite his obvious exhaustion. After dinner, Jake did his evening rounds of the ship. Everything was functioning well. The engines hummed steadily. Life support was perfect. Navigation was on course. His crew was relaxed and comfortable, but when he passed the corridor leading to the Vrelnathi quarters, he heard something. A small sound like a whimper or a gasp of pain. Jake stopped walking. He listened carefully. There it was again. It was coming from the room shared by Ambassador Krelvax and Pipkrell. He knew he should not listen. This was a private family matter. Different species, different rules. But his feet carried him closer to the door anyway. Through the thin walls, he heard voices. Krelvax was speaking in a low tone, serious and firm. Pipkrell responded, his young voice quiet and strained. Jake's translator picked up fragments. Tomorrow you will complete 50 laps, not 40. Yes, Father. You will not show weakness. Not to me, not to the warriors, not to these humans. I understand, Father. Our people are watching. Our pride is judging. You must prove yourself worthy. I will, Father. I promise. There was a long silence. Then Krelvax spoke again, his voice slightly different. Sleep now. Tomorrow will be harder. Jake moved away from the door before he could be caught listening. He returned to the bridge, his mind troubled. He understood cultural differences. He respected that different species had different ways. But watching that young cub push himself to the breaking point, hearing the pressure in his father's voice, it did not sit right. Danny had finished his shift and gone to bed. Pete was on night watch, monitoring communications. Jake sat in his captain's chair, staring at the stretched stars outside the window. Something wrong, Captain? Pete asked. No, Jake lied. Just thinking. But he could not stop thinking about tomorrow, when the training would begin again. The ambassador breathed in deeply, scenting his cub. When Krelvax pulled back, his golden eyes were different somehow. The hardness had changed into something Jake could almost recognize. You protected him, the ambassador said. It was not a question, not an accusation. Just a statement of fact, yes. Without thought for your own safety? Without concern for diplomatic consequences. A child was hurt. Nothing else mattered. Krelvax made a sound deep in his chest. It might have been approval. Among my people, when a cub is endangered, any member of the pride may intervene. But such action must be judged by the alpha. Jake's arms tightened slightly around Pipkrell. Judge however you need to. But I will not apologize for this. To his complete surprise, the ambassador pressed his forehead against Jake's. The contact was brief but meaningful. When Krelvax stepped back, his expression held something that looked like respect. You have acted as pride, the ambassador said. You have shown the strength of protection. This is not weakness as I once believed. He turned to his warriors. Leave us. We will speak of this later. The three warriors hesitated, then bowed their heads and left the cargo bay. Lisa, still standing in the doorway, caught Jake's eye. He nodded to her and she left as well. Though her expression showed she wanted to stay, now it was just Jake, Krelvax, and the exhausted cub in Jake's arms. Take him to your medical facility, the ambassador said. I will follow. Jake carried Pipkrell through the corridors of the ship. The cub had stopped trembling now, his breathing evening out. His eyes were half closed, his body going limp with relief that the ordeal was over. His small claws still gripped Jake's shirt, but more gently now. The medical bay was small but well equipped. Jake laid Pipkrell on the examination bed carefully. The cub made a small sound of protest when Jake started to pull away, but then seemed to catch himself. He released his grip on Jake's shirt and tried to lay still and formal. It's okay, Jake said quietly. You can relax here? Lisa arrived moments later. She had trained as a medic before becoming an engineer, and she kept the medical systems maintained. She began running scans immediately, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Extreme physical exhaustion, she read from the scanner. Dehydration, elevated stress hormones, muscle strain throughout his body, but nothing permanently damaged. He is built tough, I will give him that. Can you help him? Jake asked. Fluids, rest, and some high-protein food when he is ready for it. He will be fine in a day or two. Lisa looked at the cub with concern. But he should not train like that again. Not at his age. Ambassador Krelvax stood near the wall watching everything. His large form was still, but his eyes tracked every movement. Every piece of information. Lisa set up a fluid drip, carefully inserting the needle into Pipkrell's arm. The cub did not flinch, though his eyes watched the procedure with worry. This will help you feel better, Lisa explained. Just lie still and let it work. Pipkrell nodded. His eyes were getting heavier, his body finally allowing itself to rest now that the training had stopped. Sleep if you need to, Jake said. The cub looked at his father, as if asking permission. Krelvax gave a slight nod. Within minutes, Pipkrell's eyes closed, and his breathing deepened into sleep. Lisa checked the monitors one more time, then looked at Jake. I will watch him. You two should probably talk. Jake followed the ambassador out of the medical bay and into the corridor. They walked in silence until they reached the observation lounge. The room was empty, the windows showing the endless stream of stars as the ship flew faster than light. Krelvax stood before the windows for a long moment. Then he spoke. I owe you explanation, he said. Perhaps apology, though my people do not often give such things. You do not owe me anything, Jake said. I disagree. The ambassador turned to face him. You challenged me today. Not with violence, but with action born of care. You made me see what I was doing through different eyes. Jake leaned against the wall, giving the ambassador space to speak. My people come from a harsh world, Krelvax continued. A world where only the strong survived. Cubs were trained hard because it was the only way to prepare them for lives of constant struggle. Those who could not keep pace died. It was simple truth. But you are not on that world anymore. Jake said gently. No, we have technology now. Ships, alliances, our lives are no longer the daily battle they once were. Krelvax's tail swished. Yet we cling to the old ways. We push our cubs as we were pushed because it is our tradition, because it is our identity. There is nothing wrong with teaching strength and discipline, Jake offered. But at what cost? The ambassador looked back at the windows. Today, watching you hold my son with such care, despite not being our species, Despite the risk to yourself, I understood something. True strength is not only about endurance and fighting. It also includes knowing when to protect, when to show care. Jake said nothing. He let the ambassador work through his thoughts. I saw how Pip Krell gripped your clothing, how he relaxed in your arms, how his fear left him when you spoke gently. Krelvax's voice was quiet now. I have been training him to be strong, but I forgot to let him be a cub. He is brave, Jake said. He pushed himself harder than I have seen many adults push. He has your strength, but he is still young. He still needs time to grow, yes. The word was heavy with realization. I have been so focused on making him ready for leadership that I forgot he is not a leader yet. He is a child. They stood in silence for a while. Jake watched the stars and thought about the differences between their species, but also about the things that were the same. Parents wanting the best for their children. The struggle between tradition and change. The hard choices that came with raising the next generation. What will you do now? Jake asked. I will change our approach, Krelvax said. The warriors will adjust the training. We will include rest, as you suggested. We will remember that strength is built over time, not forced in days. Pipkrell will still be strong, Jake said. Maybe even stronger, because he will not break before he finishes growing. Krelvax turned to look at Jake directly. You are wise for your years, Captain. How do you know these things? Jake smiled slightly. I watched my own father train me when I was young. He was military, believed in discipline and toughness. But he also believed in balance. He taught me to push myself, but also to rest. To be strong, but also to be kind. I think it made me better at both. Your father sounds like an alpha worth following. He was. The ambassador nodded slowly. I will think on this, and I will try to find this balance you speak of. They returned to the medical bay together. Pip Krell was still sleeping, the fluid drip nearly empty. His face looked peaceful now, the exhaustion and stress gone from his expression. He looked young, which of course he was. Lisa was checking the monitors. His vitals are improving. The sleep is doing him good. Krelvax approached the bed. He stood looking down at his son for a long moment. Then he did something Jake did not expect. The large Velnathy reached out and gently stroked his cub's mane, a gesture so tender it made Jake's throat tighten. Sleep well, little one, the ambassador whispered in his own language. The translator caught it and repeated it in English. You have earned more rest than I gave you. Jake quietly left the room, giving the father and son privacy. He returned to the bridge, his mind full of the day's events. Danny looked up when Jake entered. So what happened? Lisa said you carried the cub out of there like a hero in a movie. It was not that dramatic, Jake said, though he knew it kind of was. The ambassador going to have your head? No, I think we reached an understanding. Danny grinned. Only you could turn a diplomatic incident into a friendship. Jake sat in his captain's chair and looked at the stars outside. He thought about the weight of Pip Krell in his arms, the trust the exhausted cub had shown. He thought about Krelvax's words, about strength and protection and the courage it took to change. Maybe they were not so different after all, humans and Velnathy. Maybe at the core, everyone just wanted their children to be safe and strong and ready for the world. The third day started early. Jake was still drinking his morning coffee when he heard the cargo bay door open below. He checked the time. It was barely 6 in the morning, ship time. The Velnathy were starting their training 2 hours earlier than yesterday. He tried to focus on his duties. There were reports to file, course corrections to check, routine maintenance to oversee, but his attention kept drifting to the cargo bay monitors. He told himself he was just being a responsible captain, making sure his ship was safe. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was worried about the cub. On the monitor, he watched Pip Krell begin his exercises. The young Velnathy looked even smaller today somehow. His movements were stiff, like his muscles were still sore from yesterday. But the warriors showed no concern for this. They started the training at full intensity immediately. Run, Krenther commanded. 50 laps around the bay. Do not stop. Pip Krell started running. His breathing was already labored after just 5 laps. By 10 laps he was gasping. By 20 his legs were shaking visibly. But he did not stop. The warriors counted each lap out loud, their voices harsh and demanding. 23. Faster. 24. Your enemies will not wait for you to catch your breath. 25. Push harder. Jake watched the cub struggle. Every lap was slower than the last. Pip Krell's small body was clearly at its limit, but he kept going. His golden eyes were focused straight ahead, his jaw set with determination that seemed too old for his young face. Danny arrived on the bridge and immediately noticed what Jake was watching. Still at it? Yeah, how long this time? They just started. But I have a bad feeling about today. Danny leaned over to look at the monitor. They watched together as Pip Krell completed lap 30, then 31, then 32. Each step looked like it took enormous effort. That's a kid, Danny said quietly. I know, a kid who can barely stand. I know. They watched in silence. By lap 40, Pip Krell was stumbling. His coordination was breaking down. He caught himself on a container once, nearly falling. The warrior said nothing, just kept counting. 43. Continue. 44. Weakness is a choice. 45. Lisa's voice came over the cum. Captain, I'm near the cargo bay. You might want to see this yourself. Jake stood up immediately. Danny, you have the bridge. He made his way down to the cargo bay, his heart beating faster with each step. When he arrived, Lisa was standing just outside the door. Her face showed clear concern. I was running diagnostics on the lower deck systems, she said. I heard the training and checked in. Jake, this does not look right. They stood together in the doorway. Pip Krell was on lap 47 now. His running was barely more than a fast walk. His legs trembled with every step. Sweat soaked his fur. His breathing was desperate. 48. You slow down. This is unacceptable. 49. One more lap. The cub pushed himself forward. Every muscle in his small body was working beyond its capacity. Jake could see it clearly. This was not training anymore. This was braking. Pip Krell started the 50th lap. He made it halfway around the bay. Then his front leg buckled. The cub went down hard. His body hit the metal floor with a sound that made Jake wince. The ceremonial staff that he had been required to carry while running clattered away across the floor for a moment. Everything was silent except for Pip Krell's ragged breathing. Stand, Krenther commanded. His voice showed no sympathy. The exercise is not complete. Pip Krell tried. Jake watched the young Vrelnathi plant his paws and push. His whole body shook with the effort. He got halfway up, his legs straightening. Then they gave out completely. He collapsed back to the floor. Stand, the warrior repeated, louder this time. The cub tried again, and failed again. His body had nothing left to give. Something in Jake's chest tightened. He felt his hands clench into fists. He looked at Lisa, who was staring at the scene with her mouth slightly open in shock. Stand, Krenther said a third time, or you prove yourself weak before these humans. Pip Krell whimpered. It was a small sound, barely audible, but Jake heard it. The sound of a child who had been pushed too far, who had given everything and had nothing left. Jake stepped into the cargo bay. His boots hit the floor with purpose. The warriors turned toward him, their expressions shifting to surprise. Krenther's eyes narrowed. Captain, the warrior said, this is pride business. You should not be here. Jake did not answer. He walked straight toward Pip Krell, his eyes fixed on the collapsed cub. The warriors moved as if to block him, but something in Jake's expression made them hesitate. He reached Pip Krell and crouched down. The cub looked up at him with dazed, exhausted eyes. His small body was still trembling, still trying to obey the command to stand even though it was physically impossible. Easy, Jake said quietly. It's okay. You can rest now. Pip Krell blinked at him, confusion mixing with the exhaustion in his expression. Jake made a decision. He reached out and carefully gathered the young Vrelnathi into his arms. Pip Krell was heavier than Jake expected, solid muscle even at his age, but not unmanageable. The cub's damp fur pressed against Jake's shirt. His heart hammered like a drum, far too fast. Human, Krenthar's voice was low and dangerous. Put down the cub? You interfere with his training. Jake stood up, holding Pip Krell securely. This is not training. This is harm. You do not understand our ways. I understand that this child just collapsed from exhaustion. On my ship, I am responsible for everyone's safety. That includes him. The other two warriors moved closer. Their body language was aggressive. One of them growled, a deep rumbling sound that would have been terrifying under normal circumstances. Jake held his ground. You can take this up with your ambassador. Right now, I'm taking him to the medical bay. You have no authority over pride matters, Krenthar said. I have every authority on this ship. The standoff might have turned violent, but a voice from the doorway stopped everyone. What happens here? Ambassador Krelvax entered the cargo bay. His massive form filled the doorway. His golden eyes swept the scene, taking in everything. The scattered training equipment, the warriors in aggressive stances. His son held in the arms of a human captain. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Jake turned to face the ambassador, still holding Pip Krell. The cub had gone very still, pressed against Jake's chest. His small claws gripped Jake's shirt, not with aggression but with the instinctive hold of a frightened child. Ambassador, Jake said, his voice steady. Your son collapsed during training. He needs medical attention. Krelvax approached slowly. Each step was deliberate, measured. He came within a few feet of Jake and stopped. His eyes locked onto the humans. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Pip Krell's labored breathing and the distant hum of the ship's engines. Jake did not look away. He met the ambassador's gaze directly, knowing this might be seen as a challenge in Vrelnathi culture. But he did not care. This was about more than cultural respect now. You hold my son, Krelvax said quietly. Yes, you removed him from his training. He could not continue. His body gave out. That is for him to overcome. He tried. 3 times he tried to stand. He could not. There is nothing left to overcome. Krelvax's expression was unreadable. His tail swished once. A movement Jake had learned meant the Vrelnathi was processing something. You acted without permission, the ambassador said. I acted because it was right. Right by whose measure? By any measure that values life over pride. The words hung in the air. Jake knew he had probably gone too far. This was a diplomatic mission. He was just a cargo ship captain. He had no business challenging an ambassador's parenting methods, but Pip Krell's small body was warm against his chest, and Jake could feel the rapid heartbeat slowly beginning to calm. He could feel the exhausted trembling gradually easing. And he could not bring himself to regret his choice. Krelvax stared at him for another long moment. Then, to everyone's complete shock, the ambassador leaned forward. He brought his large head down and pressed his muzzle gently against the top of Pip Krell's head. Right where the cub rested against Jake's shoulder, the gesture was tender, protective, completely at odds with everything Jake had seen from the Vrelnathi so far.